good book, Partners in Power. I would like to suggest that to you. Go to your library.
Who's the author?
Roger Morris.
Okay.
It does some very good research on his governance of Arkansas, the things that went on, what happened, how things were dealt with. I think it's very important for people to be informed on these things and to truly think about it, digest it, consider it, and apply it to what is happening today.
Thanks. We'll go ahead and take our last call, then we'll let you both respond. Southgate, Michigan, our last call. Good morning.
Yes, I'll make it quick. I know the show's almost over.
Thanks.
I would like both people to know, and I'd like people just to know in general, that I actually believe the president. And what mostly concerns me is that I trust him to do what's right for this country, because I know he made mistakes in the beginning, and I had some problems with those. But in the last 4 years or so, he has done what's right for this country, and he's helped my family, and he's helped a lot of other families. And I think it has been a whole convergence of people that just hate him so much, and that disturbs me. Thank you.
Audrey Mullen.
Well, again, it's not a question of hating somebody and being out to get them. You can hate somebody all you want, but that does not spark investigations. Illegal activities and patterns of illegal activities spark investigations. And it's been one thing after another with Bill Clinton. And I think that where there is smoke, there is fire. And a number of his colleagues and former business associates have been indicted and sent to jail. I think that many of his activities really warrant looking into.
And you can say what you want. Well, go ahead.
You can say what you will and have the last word, but really, it's like the old story of the two women watching the army march by, and one woman says to the other, gee, it's a shame how they're all out of step except my Johnny.
Lisa Caputo.
Okay. You know, I thank the caller for her views. I think that, as I've said from the get-go on the show, that we have to wait until all the facts come out, that the president has denied all the allegations, and I believe the president, and I'm going to let the facts come out as they will. I think that you raise a very important point, which is that it's a notion of the privacy issues. What is going on right now in Washington is an investigation, Audrey would claim, into obstruction of justice. These are investigations into allegations of sex. I personally, Lisa Caputo speaking for herself, have to question what in the world that has to do with governing the country.
Tomorrow, Washington Journal welcomes Tom Ferraro of Bloomberg News and Dr. James Dobson, founder and president of Focus on the Family. Join us with your comments and questions tomorrow morning at 7 Eastern here on C-SPAN. And this weekend on America and the Courts, Scripps College in California awards its highest honor to Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. America and the Courts this Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. Next, author Gore Vidal. This afternoon at the National Press Club, he talked about the U.S. role in the world, the National Security Act, and the Constitution. Following his remarks, he took questions from the Press Club audience. The event's about an hour.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. This is our 90th anniversary year. My name is Doug Harbrecht. I'm president of the National Press Club and Washington News editor of Business Week magazine, a McGraw-Hill Companies publication. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. Tomorrow, Secretary of Agriculture Dan Glickman will speak about food safety. And our last speaker in March will be James Wolfenson, President of the World Bank, speaking on March 25th. In April, we'll hear Michel Comdessus, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, on April 2nd. Stephen Goldstone, Chair and CEO of JR Nabisco, on April 3rd. Mac McLarty, Counselor to the President and Special Envoy to the Americas, on April 9th. Marvin Runyon, Postmaster General, on April 14th. Charles Rosati, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will appear, of course, on Tax Day, April 15th. Zoe Caldwell, actor and winner of the 1998 Sir John Gielgud Award, will speak on April 17th. Transcripts and audio files of National Press Club luncheons will be posted this afternoon at our website, npc.press.org. To purchase audio and videotapes, call 1-888-343-1940. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table and pass them up to me. I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests have been introduced. From your right, Jeffrey Dvorkin, Vice President for News, National Public Radio. Russell Mokaber, Corporate Crime Reporter. Andy Glass, Cox Newspapers. Bob Murray, Publisher, Congressional Quarterly. Godfrey Sperling, Christian Science Monitor. Marcus Raskin, co-founder of the Institute for Policy Studies. Fred Kaplan, professor, City University of New York, and a biographer of our guest today. Ken Esky, chairman of the Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for just a moment. Gil Klein, media general and former president of the National Press Club, who arranged today's lunch. And the remainder of our head table will be introduced in just a minute. But first, we have some good news to share. It is said that every reporter has the first chapter of the great American novel buried in his bottom desk drawer, just waiting for the time and inspiration to turn it into a best-selling, fame-attracting, money-making prose. To test that theory, the National Press Club holds an annual fiction writing contest for our members. This year, the contest was judged by two literary agents, Nina Graybill and Jenny Bent. And here are the results. Honorable mention goes to freelance writer Elizabeth Shevchuk Armstrong for a chapter from her historical novel, Hotspur. Elizabeth, would you come up, please? Second honorable mention goes to Ron Geigley of Geigley and Associates for his story, The Woods. Ron? Now the ribbons. The third prize goes to Stephanie Fall for a chapter of her novel entitled Tag City. Stephanie has now won first, second, and third prize in the 5 years of this contest, yet inexplicably, she's still working for the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. Second prize goes to Grant Dillman. Grant, who was UPI bureau chief, literally had this novel entitled Impatient Mistress in his bottom drawer for decades. He started writing it during the Johnson administration, when he concluded someone would have to be crazy to want to be president. It's the story of a president who suffers from schizophrenia, and the wire service reporter, I wonder who that is, who finds out about it despite the White House's best efforts to conceal it. Grant? And first prize goes to Keith Epstein, Washington correspondent for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, for his story entitled Homecoming. This story grew out of Epstein's coverage of pilots returning from the Gulf War, especially when a 4-year-old girl rushed out to greet her daddy. It deals with the psychological effects of being away from home for a year and of the mental impact of the smart bombs on the pilots who fired them. Well, congratulations to you all. And now to our speaker. Today we are pleased to have with us Mr. Gore Vidal, a man who has been described, not by himself, but by the Boston Globe, as our greatest living man of letters. Back when Mr. Vidal was beginning his trade, he shocked the public by writing about sex and scandal in Washington. Now, of course, any two-bit White House correspondent can get more salacious stuff than he was writing about back that used to upset the blue bloods back in the 50s. So what is Vidal writing about now? The Smithsonian Institution. That's the title of his latest book. But I have to tell you, this is not your father's Smithsonian Institution. Somehow this is a 13-year-old who's involved in time travel, who goes to the basement of the Smithsonian Institution, gets involved in time travel to develop the atomic bomb in the 30s. This is eventually Mrs. Grover Cleveland. Let me tell you, this is one weird book. And a lot of fun to read, but I hope he'll explain more about it to us today. The last time Mr. Vidal spoke here in 1994, he had already been at our podium about a dozen times. And his father, an aviation pioneer, as well as his grandfather, Senator Thomas Pryor Gore of Oklahoma, spoke here as well. One can imagine in the Vidal homestead in Ravello, Italy, shelf upon shelf of National Press Club mugs dating back to the early part of the 20th century. So it is only fitting that he speak to us just days before our 90th anniversary. Young Gore Vidal grew up in Washington, immersed in its politics as he read the congressional record to his blind grandfather, Senator Gore. His first historical novel was entitled Washington, D.C., and it delved into the underside of Washington politics of the 1950s. It served as the foundation for a series of novels that chronicle American history, including Burr, Lincoln, 1876, Empire, and Hollywood. They search, sometimes in vain, for the nation's great promise. Few contemporary writers have generated as much controversy as Gore Vidal. In his 23 novels, 2 plays, and many, many essays, not to mention countless television appearances, Mr. Vidal has dissected every aspect of American history, politics, and life. And he is here to do it again for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome for Mr. Gore Vidal.
Thank you. I first spoke here in 1961, and I have mixed feelings about the press, as everybody does, but you are the most wonderful audience because you eat lunch faster than any group that I have ever talked to. I mean, it is such a joy. It's just over like that. And we can get down to the really serious stuff about Monica and Kathleen's correspondence, to really important subjects. But before we get to that, I planned just a little foreplay here about the origins of the American empire and the meaning of the Cold War, how it started, who started it, who benefited. Because here we are at the 20th century, and the second Christian millennium are heading hand in hand for the exit. Personally, I thought they'd never go without taking us with them. We've still got about 700 more days, so fingers are crossed. We all know that centuries and millennia are just arbitrary markings, a bit like the bookkeeping at Paramount Pictures. I see some of you have made movie sales. But symbolically, they mean a lot to those who are interested in why we are today what we are and doing what we are doing. This goes particularly for the one indisposable, or did the president say indispensable, nation on earth, and the last self-styled global empire loaded down with nukes, bases, and debts. I should note here that I have now lived through nearly 3/4 of this century. I enlisted in the Army of the United States at 17, went to the Pacific, did nothing useful. I was just there, as Richard M. Nixon used to say, when the bombs were falling. Actually, the bombs are not really falling on either one of us. I was writing a novel, and he was making a fortune playing poker. Now, suddenly, it's 1998. I never thought I'd see that happen. And last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Also, more ominously, last July 26 was the 50th anniversary of the National Security Act that, without any national debate or the people's consent, replaced the old American Republic with a national security state very much in the global empire business, which explains, but first let us get into the time machine. It is the Ides of August, 1945. Germany and Japan have surrendered, and some 13 million Americans are headed home to enjoy, well, the bottom line was always being alive. Home turned out to be a sort of fairground where fireworks go off and the band plays Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, and an endlessly enticing funhouse flings open its doors and we file through. We enjoy halls of mirrors where everyone is comically distorted, ride through all the various tunnels of love, and take scary tours of horror chambers where skeletons and cobwebs and bats brush past us. And suitably chilled and thrilled, we're ready for the exit in everyday life. But, to the consternation of some and the apparent indifference of the rest, we were never really allowed to leave the funhouse. It has become a permanent part of our world, as were those goblins sitting under the apple tree. Officially, the United States was at peace. Much of Europe and most of Japan were in ruins, often literally, certainly economically. We alone had all our cities and a sort of booming economy, sort of, because it depended on war production. And there was, as far as anyone can tell, no war in the offing. Briefly, the arts flourished. It looked like it was going to be a golden age. The Glass Menagerie was staged. Copland's Appalachian Spring was played. A film called The Lost Weekend, not a bad title for what we'd gone through, won an Academy Award, and the as yet unexiled Richard Wright published a much admired work, Black Boy. While Edmund Wilson's Memoirs of Hecate County was banned for obscenity in parts of the country, though it would be allowed out today in Washington, D.C. Quaintly, each city had at least 3 or 4 daily newspapers, while New York, as befitted the world's capital, had 17 newspapers. But a novelty, television, had begun to appear in household after household, its cold, gray, distorting eye relentlessly projecting a fun house view of the world. Those who followed the ugly new minted word media began to note that often while watching television, we kept fading in and out of a chamber of horrors. Our ally in the recent war, Uncle Joe Stalin, as the accidental President Harry S. Truman called him, was growing horns and fangs that dripped blood. On Earth, we were the only great unruined power with atomic weapons, yet we were somehow at terrible risk. Why? How? The trouble appeared to be over Germany, which on February 11th 1945, had been split at the Yalta Summit meeting into 4 zones: American, Soviet, British, and French. As the Russians had done the most fighting and suffered the greatest losses, it was agreed that they should have an early crack at reparations from Germany to the extent of $20 billion. At a later meeting at Potsdam, the new President Truman, with Stalin and Churchill, reconfirmed Yalta and opted for the unification of Germany under the 4 victorious powers. But something had happened between the euphoria of Yalta and the edginess of Potsdam. As the meeting progressed, the atom bomb was tried out successfully in a New Mexico desert. We were now able to incinerate Japan, or the Soviet for that matter, and we no longer needed Russian help to defeat Japan. We started to renege on our agreements with Stalin, particularly reparations from Germany. We also quietly shelved the notion, agreed upon at Yalta, of a united Germany under 4-power control. Our aim now was to unite the 3 western zones of Germany and integrate them into our Western Europe, restoring in the process Germany's economy, hence fewer reparations. Then, as of May 1946, we began to rearm Germany. Stalin went up the wall at this betrayal. The Cold War was on. At home, the media was beginning to prepare the attentive few for disappointment. Suddenly, we were faced with the highest personal income taxes in American history to pay for more and more weapons, among them the world killer hydrogen bomb. Why? Because the Russians were coming. No one knew quite why they were coming or with what. Weren't they still burying 20 million dead? Official explanations for all this made very little sense. But then, as Truman's Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, merrily observed, in the State Department, we used to discuss how much time that mythical average American citizen put in each day listening, reading, and arguing about the world outside his country. It seemed to us that 10 minutes a day would be a high average. So why bore the people? Secret bipartisan government is best for what, after all, is or should be a society of docile workers, enthusiastic consumers, obedient soldiers who will believe just about anything for at least 10 minutes. The national security state, the NATO alliance, the 40 years Cold War were all created without the consent, much less the advice of the American people. Of course, there were elections during the crucial time, but Truman, Dewey, Eisenhower, Stevenson, Kennedy, Nixon were of a single mind as to the desirability of inventing first a many-tentacled enemy, communism, the star of the Chamber of Horrors, then to combat so much evil, install a permanent wartime state at home with loyalty oaths, a national peacetime draft, and secret police to keep watch over homegrown traitors, as the few enemies of the national security state were known. Then followed 40 years of mindless wars which created a debt of $5 trillion that hugely benefited aerospace and firms like General Electric, whose longtime TV spokesman, Ronald Reagan, was eventually retired to the White House. Why go into all of this now? Have we not done marvelously well as the United States of amnesia? Certainly European bankers envious our powerless labor unions. Only 14% of the lucky fundsters are privileged to belong to a labor union. And our industries, lean, mean, downsized, with no particular place for the redundant to go except into the hell of sizzle and fry and burn. Today, we give orders to every country on our globe, tell them with whom to trade and to which of our courts they must show up for indictment should they disobey us. Yet something omnious, as Darryl Zanuck used to say, no one ever corrected him either. Something really omnious is happening. We have come to what Tennessee Williams once called a moon of pause. When I asked him, what on earth does that mean, Tennessee? It is, he said loftily, the actual Greek translation of menopause. I said that the word moon did not come from menses, Latin, not Greek, for month. Then what, he asked suspiciously, is the Latin for moon? And I told him it was luna and all the fun that he might have. With the word lunatic, he sighed and cut. But suddenly, summer before last, at the Madrid conference about the extension of NATO, which Senator Lott has just said is of no interest for a debate in the Senate, a moon of pause seemed a nice, dotty phrase for the change of life that our empire is now going through with no enemy and no discernible function. While we were at our busiest in the funhouse, no one ever told us what the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was really about. March 17, 1948, the Treaty of Brussels called for a military alliance of Britain, France, Benelux to be joined by the US and Canada on March 23rd. The impetus behind NATO was the United States, whose principal foreign policy, since the administration of George Washington, was to avoid entangling alliances. Now, as the Russians were supposed to be coming, we replaced the old republic with a newborn national security state and set up shop as the major European power west of the Elbe. We were now hell-bent on the permanent division of Germany between our western zone, plus the French and British zones, and the Soviet sector to the east. Serenely, we broke every agreement that we had made with our former ally, now horrendous communist enemy. For those interested in the details, Carolyn Eisenberg's, she happens to be in the room now, I'm told, Drawing the Line, the American Decision to Divide Germany, 1944-49, is a masterful survey of an empire, sometimes blindly, sometimes brilliantly, assembling itself, first its allies, and turning them and its enemies like Germany, Italy, Japan, into client states, permanently subject to our military and economic diktat. Although the Soviets still wanted to live by our original arrangements at Yalta and even Potsdam, we had decided unilaterally to restore the German economy in order to enfold a rearmed Germany into Western Europe, thus isolating the Soviet, a nation which had not recovered from the Second World War and had no nuclear weapons. It was Dean Acheson again who elegantly explained all the lies that he was obliged to tell Congress and the 10-minute attention span average American. This is gorgeous stuff, by the way. If we did make our points, this is Acheson writing in his memoirs, if we did make our points clearer than truth, isn't that glorious? Clearer than truth. We did not differ from most other educators and could hardly do otherwise. Qualification must give way to simplicity of statement, nicety and nuance to bluntness, almost brutality in carrying home a point. Thus were two generations of Americans conditioned by their overlords so that at the word communism, there is a Pavlovian reflex as the brain goes totally dead. In regard to the enemy, Ambassador to Moscow, Walter Bedell Smith, wrote in December 1947, apropos a conference to regularize European matters, "The difficulty," he wrote, "under which we labor is that in spite of our announced position, we really do not want nor intend to accept German unification in any terms the Russians might agree to, even though they seem to meet most of our requirements. This is higher diplomacy. Hence Stalin's frustration that led to the famous blockade of the Allied section of Berlin, overcome by General Lucius Clay's successful airlift. As Eisenberg writes, with the inception of the Berlin blockade, President Truman articulated a simple story that featured the Russians trampling the wartime agreements in their ruthless grab for the former German capital. The president did not explain that the United States had abandoned Yalta and Potsdam, that it was pushing the formation of a West German state against the misgivings of many Europeans, and that the Soviets had launched the blockade to prevent partition. This was funhouse politics at its most tragical. The case for an American world empire was never properly argued since the debate, what little there was, centered on the alleged desire of the Soviet Union to conquer the whole world, just as Hitler and the Nazis were trying to do until stopped in 1945. On March 12, 1947, Truman addressed Congress to proclaim what would be known as the Truman Doctrine, in which he targeted our ally of 2 years earlier as the enemy. The subject at hand was a civil war in Greece, supposedly directed by the Soviet. We could not tolerate this, as suddenly, this is his quotation, the policy of the United States is to support free peoples who are resisting attempted suppression of personal freedom. Thus, Truman made the entire world the specific business of the United States. Although Greek insurgents were getting some help from Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, the Soviet gave none. Russia stayed out. They still hoped that the British, whose business Greece had been, would keep order. But as Britain had neither the resources nor the will, they called on the U.S. to step in. Behind the usual closed doors, Atchison was stirring up Congress with Iago-like intensity. Russian pressure of some sort, he said, has brought the Balkans to the point where a highly possible Soviet breakthrough might open 3 continents to Soviet penetration. Senators gasped, grew pale, wondered how to get more defense contracts into their states. Of the major politicians, only former Vice President Henry Wallace dared answer Truman's clearer-than-truth version of history. Wallace said yesterday, March 12th, 1947, marked a turning point in American history, for it is not a Greek crisis that we face. It is an American crisis. Yesterday, President Truman proposed, in effect, that America police Russia's every border. There is no regime too reactionary for us, provided it stands in Russia's expansionist path. There is no country too remote to serve as the scene of a contest which may widen until it becomes a world war. 9 days after Truman declared war on communism, he installed a federal loyalty oath program. All government employees must now swear allegiance to the new order. Henry Wallace struck again. The President's executive order creates a master index of public servants, from the janitor in the village post office to the cabinet members. They are to be sifted and tested and watched and appraised. Truman was nervously aware that many regarded Wallace as true heir to Roosevelt's New Deal. Wallace was also likely to enter the presidential race of 1948. Truman now left truth behind in the dust. Here's his quote: "The attempt of Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin et al. To fool the world and the American Crackpots Association, represented by Joe Davies, Henry Wallace, Claude Pepper, and the actors and artists in immoral Greenwich Village, It's just like Hitler's and Mussolini's so-called socialist states. Give them hell, Harry. In the wake of Truman's cuckoo-like emergence from the old-fashioned closet of the American Republic, a new American state was being born in order to save the nation and the great globe itself from communism. The nature of this militarized state was from the beginning beyond rational debate. Characteristically, Truman and Atchison insisted on closed hearings of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. These matters were too important to share with a people whose spare 10 minutes was now more and more filling up with television. The media spoke with a single voice. Time Life publisher Henry Luce said it loudest: "God has founded America as a global beacon of freedom." He once said to me, "The great task for the United States in the American century is the Christianization of China." I remember thinking then we were really in trouble. It's before I knew this background, which is now coming out. Dissenters like Wallace were labeled communists and ceased to engage meaningfully in public life. An ancestral voice in his own time, he spoke on May 21st, 1947. "Today, in blind fear of communism, we are turning aside from the United Nations. We are approaching a century of fear." And thus far, he's proved to be half right. On July 26, 1947, Congress enacted the National Security Act, which created the National Security Council, still going strong, and the Central Intelligence Agency, still apparently going over a cliff as the result of decades of bad intelligence, not to mention all those cheery traitors for whom the country club at Langley, Virginia was once an impenetrable cover. When the original North American Treaty Organization was created, only the Augustus Manquet de Gaulle got the point of what we were doing. He took France out of our Cosa Nostra and developed his own atomic bomb. But France was still very much linked to the Imperium, through the CIA and other secret forces. Political control was exerted within the empire, not only driving the Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson around a bend too far, but preventing Italy from ever having a cohesive government by not allowing the historic compromise, a government of Christian Democrats and communists. The Soviet, always reactive, promptly cracked down on their client states, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany, and a wall went up in Berlin to spite their face, not ours. From 1950 to 1990, Europe was dangerously divided and armed to the teeth. But as American producers of weapons were never richer, all was well with their world. At Yalta, Roosevelt wanted to break up the European colonial empires, particularly that of the French. Of Indochina, FDR said, France has milked it for 100 years. For the time being, he proposed a UN trusteeship. Then he died. Unlike Roosevelt, Truman was not a philatelist. Had he been a stamp collector, he might have known where the various countries in the world were and who lived in them. Like every good American, he knew he hated communism. He also hated socialism, which may or may not have been the same thing. No one was ever quite sure. Yet as early as the American election of 1848, socialism, imported by comical German immigrants with noses always in books, was an ominous specter, calculated to enrage a raw capitalist society with labor unions, health care, and other devil's work, still being fiercely resisted a century and a half later. In 1946, when Ho Chi Minh asked the United States to take Indochina under its wing, Truman said, "No way, you're some kind of Fu Manchu communist, the worst." In August 1945, Truman told de Gaulle that the French could return to Indochina. We were no longer FDR anti-imperialist. As Ho had his northern republic, the French installed Baudin in the south. February 1st, 1950, the State Department, of all places, came to this extraordinary conclusion. This is their report. The choice confronting the United States is to support the French in Indochina or face the extension of communism over the remainder of the continental area of Southeast Asia and possibly further westward. Thus, without shepherds or even a napalm star, the domino theory was born in a humble State Department manger. On May 8, 1950, Atchison recommended economic and military aid to the French in Vietnam. By 1955, the U.S. was paying 40% of the French cost of that war. For a quarter century, the United States was to fight in Vietnam because our ignorant leaders and their sharp-eyed financiers never realized that the game is not dominoes, but chess. Happily, nothing ever stays the same. During the last days of the waning moon, a haphazard Western European Economic Union has been cobbled together. Then, as the Soviet, demonstrating its pure viciousness, abruptly folded, the two Germanys, leaving us high and dry and petulant, the two Germanys that we had so painstakingly kept apart reunited. Washington was suddenly adrift, and in the sky the moon of empire paused. Neither Reagan nor Bush had much knowledge of history or geography. Nevertheless, orders still kept coming from the White House, but they were less and less heeded because everyone knew that the Oval One had a bank overdraft of $5 trillion, and he could no longer give presents to good clients or wage war without first passing the hat to the Germans and the Japanese, as he was obliged to do when Ted Turner had his light show for CNN in the Persian Gulf. Gradually, it is now becoming evident to even the most distracted fundster that there is no longer any need for NATO because there is no enemy. One might say there never really was one, even when NATO was started. But over the years, we did succeed in creating a pretty dangerous Soviet, a funhouse mirror version of ourselves. Although the United States may yet, in support of Israel, declare war on 1 billion Muslims, the Europeans will stay out of that one. They recall 1529 when Turks besieged Vienna, not as obliging guest workers, but as world conquerors. Never again. The time has now come for the Europeans to free themselves of their American masters. Our motive for hanging on to empire is obvious. With an expanded NATO, our arms makers, if not workers, are in for a bonanza. As it is, American sale of weapons went up 23% last year, while restrictions on sales to Latin America are being lifted. Chile, ever menaced by Ecuador, plans to buy 24 F-16 jet fighters. But it is an expanded NATO that causes true joy in the boardrooms. Upon joining NATO, the lucky new club member is obliged to buy expensive weapons from the likes of Lockheed Martin, recently merged with Northrop Grumman. Since the new members have precarious economies and the old ones are not exactly booming, the American taxpayer, a wan goose that lays few eggs, will have to borrow even more money to foot the bill, which the Congressional Budget Office says should come to $125 billion over 15 years, with the U.S. paying most of it. Yeltsin correctly sees this as a hostile move against Russia, not to mention an expensive renewal of the Cold War. There comes a moment when empires cease to exert energy and become symbolic or existential, as we used to say back in the 40s. The current wrangling over NATO demonstrates what a quandary a symbolic empire is in when it wants to maintain its view of itself at home and abroad, and yet lacks the mind, much less the resources, to impose its hegemony upon its former client states. Happily, in the absence of money and common will, nothing much will probably happen. Meanwhile, there's a new and better world ready to be born. The optimum economic unit in the world is now the city-state. Thanks to technology, everyone knows or can know something about everyone else on the planet. The message now pounding in over the internet is the irrelevancy, not to mention the sheer danger of the traditional nation-state, much less empire. Currently, the warlord bankers at Peking are tolerating not only vigorous semi-autonomies like Shanghai, but they are enjoying Hong Kong for the present. We may not like the way Singapore is run, though we seem to be imitating their politics by suing in the courts our political enemies, thus breaking them. But it is, relatively speaking, a greater commercial success, perhaps even than the United States. In the next century, barring accident, the common euro market will evolve not so much into a union of ancient blood-stained states as a mosaic of homogeneous regions like the Spanish-French Basques, or city-states like Milan, each loosely linked in trade with a clearinghouse information center at Brussels. They would orchestrate finance and trade and the policing of cartels. Basques, Bretons, Walloons, Scots, who want to be rid of onerous nation-states, should be let to go in order to pursue and even, why not, overtake happiness, the goal, or so we Americans have always pretended to believe, of the human enterprise. So on that predictably sententious American note, I am tempted to enjoin the movers and shakers of this world to recall the Greek doctor's oath, above all, do no harm. Hippocrates also wrote, and this goes for the moved and the shaken of the world, life is short, but the art is long, the opportunity fleeting, the experiment perilous, the judgment difficult.
Thank you. If Stalin were as benign as you say, then did the Gulag not exist? Were there no purges? Was the Berlin Wall simply decorative landscaping? What about East Germany in 1953, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968? Tell us what was going on there.
I thought I just did. Never excuse your own faults by pointing to other people's. That he was a thug in regard to his own people and to the client states, that driven by fear of us, he treated badly and occupied. What I'm making the point here is the initiative was taken by us. He wanted to regularize relations with the United States, and he thought he had done it with Roosevelt. Truman, who missed the point to everything, guided by Jimmy Burns, that great cosmic thinker, managed to make every mistake in the book and to terrify Stalin. He was frightened. So he did his best he reacted always to what we did. The fact that Stalin treated his own people very, very badly is, I'm afraid, a Russian problem and not ours. We are not in the business of correcting all the governments on earth. We can't do our own, so why should we do Russia's for them? So I think it's fairly clear I'm saying what happened, that we had this terrible 40 years.
Your cousin, Vice President Al Gore, has been a willing, even eager advocate of the national security state for many years. What do you think?
Well, my cousin and I have plausible deniability about each other. There are days when I don't acknowledge his existence and days when he doesn't certainly acknowledge mine. He is a perfectly standard Southern Defense Department senator in the Senate. And now, all I do, I watch him standing behind Clinton, and his eyes are beginning to sparkle. For a long time, they looked rather dull. And if you notice him, there are times when, you know, I worry about Clinton because Albert is getting closer and closer. You know, he's going to bite one day. You know, he just has a vampire look in his eye. And suddenly there'll be a new administration right on camera. I don't think that administration will be any different from Herbert Hoover, Harry Truman, you name it, Grover Cleveland. No, Grover Cleveland was pretty good about labor unions.
Speaking as a morally liberated Washington blue blood, what is the most serious breach of ethics committed in politics today? Are there ethics in politics anymore, assuming there ever were?
Well, the most visible change in my lifetime, and the lifetime of most people here, has been the money that is spent on campaigns, which is now obscene. And the Congress went through a very pretty dance, didn't they, over the campaign contributions. You know, there was a lot of passion and heat in that debate. Well, the system will never change because they're paid for by corporations. I mean, it's like asking the burglar as he reaches the second floor to kick away his ladder. He's not going to do that ever. If I were optimistic, I would propose civil war, but I'm not going to.
Is any meaningful political action possible in a nation informed through television?
Well, don't leave the press out. You know, I think they play their part, too. I don't know that you can ever learn much from television because it's so spotty. And also, you're not supposed to look into a pulsing light, which is television. It's very bad for your brain immediately goes from alpha waves, which is when you're really thinking, to beta waves, when your mind is sort of resting. And I don't know about you, it may just be, now that I'm in the springtime of my senility, it may well be my brain is going, but simultaneously I find I often don't understand what they say. They're speaking quite clearly, and I'm one sentence behind. Then I fall 2 sentences behind. Then it gets very surrealist. No, I don't think it's an ideal method of information, but we don't have any alternative.
You said that the nation state will be replaced by the city state. Isn't the new unit of power really the multinational corporation?
Well, that's certainly true. The multinational, you know, in the old days, by old days, 30, 40 years ago, something like 45% of the revenues of the U.S. government came from the taxpayers, income tax. And about 45% came from taxes on corporate profits. 45% still comes from us, and the corporations contribute about 10%. That is why people are paid money by corporations to go to Congress to make special legislation. It's all perfectly legal, so that they don't have to pay tax. So they make no contribution, and the people make a considerable one. That is one of the problems that would have to be addressed at some point. How you curb them, I don't know. You can't find them. I did a piece a few years ago on ITT, and well, they paid no tax in America on a couple $2 billion profits. And I was told that you can't really find them. If you send a postcard to Zurich, you might get an answer, but then again, you know, they're traveling all the time. They're vacationing. ITT is probably in Hawaii now, you know, and under an assumed name. So I don't quite know how you trap them, but I certainly would like to.
What advice would you give President Clinton about his ongoing problems with the sex scandal surrounding the White House right now, its interns, etc.?
Well, now we get to the point. Thought you'd never ask. His first mistake was the famous 6-hour deposition to Ken Starr, in which asked about Monica, whom I think of. You remember that movie, Play Misty for Me? Well, there's a girl in there who tries to kill Clint Eastwood, who's a disc jockey. She's mad and looks not unlike Monica. I would be worried about her. His mistake was when asked had he had sexual relations with this enchantress. He should have said his own most famous line, "Don't ask, don't tell." In other words, Judge Starr, none of your damn business. That's what a real president would have done. Can you imagine Abraham Lincoln answering that question? George Washington's sword would be halfway through. This pudgy prosecutor. You remember there was an actor called Grady Sutton, a big southern sissy with a big round face. He was always in W.C. Fields movies. He was a wonderful foil for Fields. And Fields finally turned on him one day and said, "Grady, the problem with you is you've got too much of the tomboy in you." Well, I feel that about Ken Starr. There's just too much of the tomboy in him, and he's feeling his oats. And any man who says the First Amendment is about truth should be put away in an institution, preferably the last year of high school, where you are given the Bill of Rights to read. The First Amendment is about telling lies and free speech. Truth doesn't enter into it at all. You know, there was a book not long ago called The Day That America Told the Truth, oxymoronic title. And 94% of our countrymen admitted to being habitual liars. Now, do we want an unrepresentative president? I should say not.
Mr. Vidal, you write very readable novels. Why do you give them such dull titles like Washington, D.C. and the Smithsonian Institution?
So that you would ask me that question.
Who is providing the world's intellectual leadership these days, if any?
I see nothing discernible on any horizon that I have addressed my eye to. I'm told in Latvia there are a couple of very bright guys. And there's one woman in Riga who knows everything on Earth, but I can't get her address either. I think she works for ITT.
Who is your favorite author?
Oh. In my lifetime, the only writer I wholeheartedly admired was Italo Calvino, an Italian writer. The further deponent saith not.
Well, before I ask our final question, I have some things here for you. I think
mug.
Well, no, two of these things we've already seen before. One is a certificate of appreciation for appearing today.
Thank you.
One is our own history, the National Press Club's 90th anniversary history, which I hope you'll curl up with on the sofa.
Yes.
And you can put this on at the family homestead in Italy.
Tupperware. That's why I come here.
And for our last question today, why is it that you live in Italy anyway?
Well, I get work done there. I write there, and if I'm here, I politic all the time, which takes up a lot of time. But I also have a house in the Hollywood Hills. So, arguably, I don't live in America at all.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming today, Mr. Vidal, and thank you all for coming in. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Kate Goggin, Joanne Booz, Pat Nelson, Melanie Abdel-Dermont, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. We're adjourned. Thank you.
And by the way, Mr. Vidal will be on tomorrow's Washington Journal program. Join us here on C-SPAN starting at 7 a.m. Eastern. If you're interested in other authors, join us for our weekly series, Book Notes. This week, Ernest Lefevre discusses his recent book, The Irony of Virtue. Join us on Sunday night at 8, Eastern and Pacific. Next, Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle. During a news conference this morning, he discussed federal funding for education, weapons inspection teams in Iraq, and the role of the United Nations in diplomacy. The briefing's 25 minutes.
School lunches? I have mine.
Crayons for them.
That's right. So where's yours? Well, this is an important week for education, and it's an important week for two reasons. One, the floor activity will focus on the debate on the so-called Coverdell Amendment. And then, of course, the Budget Committee itself will determine the commitment by this country and by the Congress on education over the course of the next year. This is the Coverdell Amendment. This is the Republican answer to the problems we have in education. $7. This is about $7 worth of help for a public school, and if you look inside, there's some Elmer's glue, a couple of pencils, and this is what they view to be the solution to education. This is their answer. And our question is that all there is? Is that all you can do? When we have the problems we have in education today, is that all you can do? We have problems that go way beyond what $7 could possibly address. And for that reason, Democrats will be offering a series of amendments, including one substitute amendment that deals directly with what we view to be one of the largest problems in education. Our amendment, the Mosley-Braun Amendment, the interest-free school modernization bond program, will allow new cost-effective school financing options for communities, better learning environment for children, property and sales tax relief for working families and seniors, better equipped workers for businesses and economic growth. And here's the reason why that amendment is necessary and why this Republican solution is so inappropriate and so short-sighted and so small in terms of the response to the need. 74% of the nation's public schools are more than 25 years old. Nearly a third are more than 50 years old. 14 million kids are in schools needing major renovation. 12 million children are in schools with leaking roofs or defective plumbing. 10 million kids are in schools with inadequate lighting. 7 million kids are in schools with safety code violations. I'll bet you there are people in this room who have kids in schools that are deficient, because it's happening in Washington, it's happening in our suburbs in this area, it's certainly happening in South Dakota. So this isn't just a game, this isn't just a political campaign, this is serious public policy debate about one of the most important issues facing our country today. So, and the problem is only going to get worse. Public school enrollment is going to increase by 13% in the next 10 years. 6,000 new schools are going to be needed to build an estimated need to be built with $73 billion in cost. 45% of school districts are already using a total of 3,621 trailers. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'll bet you there are I mean, in just about any group, you've got adults with children whose day is spent in a trailer somewhere. That's the American. That's the metaphor for American education today. A trailer house. That is wrong, and we've got to find ways with which to address it more effectively. So our amendment really is summarized with this chart. This chart shows what our amendment would do. You've got $7.5 million in interest. We simply reduce the cost directed to school districts and communities across this country adequately enough, about 33%, to make it more viable, to give people the incentive to begin making the commitments and infrastructure that is so critical. So that's in essence. You've got this or you've got this. And we think that the answer ought to be pretty clear. We can't afford this. We can't afford simply to put $7 into public education when you've got problems the likes of which I've just described in these charts. So it starts with Coverdale, and then in the Senate Budget Committee, I think the Washington Times headline for today says it all. The Washington Times headline says, "Domenici adopts do-nothing budget plan." That's exactly what the Domenici plan is, a do-nothing budget plan. It does nothing for education. It does nothing to address these serious problems. It does nothing for after-school programs. It does nothing for the opportunities to acquire new skills. It virtually does nothing for technology in schools today. So whether it's in the Budget Committee or whether it's on the floor, this is an important week for education. And the question is, what will the Republicans do to join us to make it better, to find a way with which to address these problems in a very realistic way? And we'll know hopefully by the end of the week.
How do you react to the fact that several Democrats are supporting the Coverdale proposal?
Well, my Democratic colleagues who are supporting it are also asking the question, is that all there is? They're willing to take this, but they want to add more to it. In large measure, they will be supportive of virtually every Democratic amendment we'll offer in the hope that we can improve it. I personally think that this is misguided because it's $1.6 billion provided to people who largely don't need that kind of help. $7 isn't going to help somebody making $100,000 very much anyway. So I can't imagine they're going to come home and talk too much about what a great deal this is for somebody who's making $100,000 a year. But that's their answer.
Why do you think the Democrats are supporting?
You'd have to talk to them. I really don't know.
I mean, do you think there's pressure out there from people who are so frustrated by the public school system that they want to at least have some access to money that'll give them another choice, like private school?
Well, I'm all in favor of making sure we guarantee access to private school. But what does $7 do? And is $1.6 billion taken out of the budget for this purpose the right way to address that problem? I don't think it is.
Can you explain the $7?
Well, if you take what they are proposing in terms of tax reduction for a typical family, the Joint Tax Committee has noted that in the year 2002, a family who is sending their child to public school would be entitled to a $7 per year tax break.
Senator, what's your understanding of what Senator Lott is willing to accept in terms of allowing Democratic amendments? Is he going to let you do everything you want, or is he saying one or two and that's all?
Well, Senator Lott has proposed that maybe we offer just a couple of amendments, and we've talked about this in the past, and I understand his desire to move along, but again, I think these are too important not to be able to have a good debate. These issues have to be addressed, and we want to do so in the form of a series of amendments. So we will be proposing these amendments, and I think we will be able to prevent the invoking of cloture in order to get the job done.
Senator, why did you turn down his invitation to offer your comprehensive bill as a substitute?
Well, because it only allowed for an amendment. That was not acceptable. As I just said to Peter, it's important to be able to offer more than just one amendment. We have after-school amendments, we have construction. This is what we call the substitute amendment, but there are a series of Democratic amendments that we want to offer.
Why not just roll all of those into one bill, though, and offer it as an alternative?
Well, because we think it's much more important to focus on each individual aspect. There may be people on the Republican side who oppose the construction but who favor the after school. There may be people who oppose after school but support the construction amendment. So we want to maximize our chance for passing improvements to this bill, and if we do it piecemeal, it seems to me we have much more of an opportunity to be successful.
The only thing that would block you from offering amendments would be closure.
That's
not
right.
So as long as lot doesn't have 60 votes, you can offer all the amendments you
That's
want.
correct.
Oh,
Senator, speaking of Senator Mosley Braun, can you comment on the elections in Illinois yesterday and what kind of issues you see that involved with Mr. Fitzgerald as an opponent now?
Well, I think that we all expect it to be a challenging race, but certainly Senator Mosley Braun has reason to be encouraged today. Obviously, there's a huge difference of opinion. You have a candidate who is completely out of sync, it seems to me, with the voters of his state. And I think Senator Mosley Braun has a real opportunity here to advance her lead and to show some real strength. The voters of Illinois had a similar choice 2 years ago, and by somewhat of a significant margin chose to support a person who was in sync with the voters of Illinois, and I suspect that's exactly what they'll do this time.
Can you comment on what kind of issues, the main issues in that campaign?
I'm not enough of an Illinois political observer to be able to say what the issues are today, but I'm sure over time, I think this is going to be a very significant issue because Senator Mosley Braun, of course, is the prime author of the school construction amendment, the substitute. So education is going to be a key question. Senator Mosley Braun has devoted a tremendous amount of effort and time into providing leadership on this issue, and I would expect that right out of the box, this is going to be one of the most important questions in the campaign. What is the federal role? What is the commitment made by the federal government to public education? And I can't think of a more articulate defender of that role than Senator Mosley Braun.
Senator, could I ask you again back on the education bill, a policy question here? Would you be willing, if you could get most of your amendments incorporated into an education bill, would you also be willing to accept the education savings account as part of that legislation?
Well, I guess I'd want to withhold judgment here. I've made it as clear as I can how opposed I am to all of this, but certainly if they would accept every one of our Democratic amendments, I could accept something unacceptable, at least for now, in the effort to get things acceptable. So I'm a reasonable man. I can handle that.
Do you see any possibility of a hybrid bill coming out of this, or are both sides basically going to dig in their heels and say it's our way or no way?
Well, this is no way. The president has said he's going to veto. Well, I shouldn't say this. The Republican proposal is no way, and the president has noted he's going to veto that proposal. So that's a non-starter. It's going nowhere. And, you know, this may be a nice beginning for Republicans to try to say they're for education, but $7 doesn't get you much, as this indicates, and that's why the president's going to veto it.
But do you see something on the, say, if we look like last year's budget talks as a model where both sides had some very specific goals, and neither side got everything that they wanted, but we ended up with a kind of a smorgasbord of this from the Republicans and this from the Democrats, and so on. Do you see any possibility of that happening on education?
I do, Larry. I think it's very important for us to recognize that you've got a coalition government here. You've got Republicans in the Congress in the majority, and you've got Democrats running the administration. The president recognizes the need to find common ground. We're going to try to do that. But it has to be some real common ground. We're not going to settle for cosmetics and simply a bone here. We've got to see some real advancement in the areas that are critical to us, and education is at the very top.
Realistically, is the 100,000 teacher proposal sort of a non-starter now?
Why would it be now?
Realistically, I mean, in talking about how much time you've had and where the debate on education is going.
I don't think it is. I think that people realize what a tremendous problem we have in teacher recruitment. I just met with my school principals yesterday in South Dakota, and I think it was one of the first things that they brought up as one of their key concerns is how they recruit able teachers to come to their schools and to be fully equipped to deal with the challenges in education today. That's a problem, not only numerically, but in quality. And we've got to address it, and I don't know of another way to do it.
Senator Danforth, yesterday the Senate Appropriations Committee voted out, although one Democratic vote, the IMF bill with lots of strings attached. Will Democrats let that fly on the floor, or are you going to insist on changes that are agreeable to the President?
Well, Tom, I haven't had a chance to talk to the administration at length about it. I know they're very concerned about the stipulations or the conditions that were put on in the committee. But we've got to move this ahead, and I'm hopeful that we can find some way with which to resolve what appears to be a difference of opinion as to the propriety of these conditions. But at least it's a step in the right direction. They had a markup. We're going to the floor. That isn't all bad.
Do you think there's a chance that the IMF will end up going nowhere because Helms says there's no room for compromise on abortion? Locke says it's got to be resolved before it moves. House Republican leaders are holding that up as a roadblock too. And others, Republicans, say you have to make the changes before you get the money, or IMF should figure out how to do it without the money. They seem to be pretty dug in.
That's about as bleak as it gets.
Would you push to have both of these supplementals linked?
Yes.
And also, what do you think the votes would be in the Senate for funding offsets for the defense disaster supplemental?
Well, I think that there would be sufficient support for it, but I've noted on several occasions that I'm willing to go with the flow here if that's what it takes to get the job done. But our preference would certainly be to link these and to get them done simultaneously. To separate out and further delay IMF and UN considerations is a real mistake, and it sends all the wrong messages. So I'm hopeful that we can still find a way to do that. But as Tom noted in his question, the circumstances today are not very encouraging.
But you sense there's sufficient support for funding offsets?
Yes, I do.
You wouldn't want a vote though on
I would not, no.
Senator McCain sounded more optimistic about a tobacco deal. What have you heard about that? And you said the other day that the tobacco deal would probably be written on the floor election. What's the state of play at this time?
Well, the state of play is really about the same as it was a couple of days ago when we talked about this. I think that there is momentum and energy behind the issue that I didn't detect a few weeks or months ago. I think that ultimately there will be a markup in the Commerce Committee, even though to my knowledge no date has been yet set. I think ultimately we'll go to the floor, and that is really where the serious negotiations will begin on the array of issues that are facing us. And I would expect that it could happen sometime by early summer. I think that that's a real possibility. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of different entities here want to get a deal, and we're motivated by different factors, but nonetheless, I think that the real possibility is that we'll have legislation sent to the President, maybe even by the August recess.
Is it your sense that that legislation will give a tax increase on cigarettes?
Oh, absolutely. Tax or a user fee or whatever you want to call it.
A whopping increase or just a little token?
Let's see, whopping. How would one describe whopping?
Yeah.
More than $7.
I think it'll be
more than $1.
If I had to guess, I'd say it'll be $1.50.
What would be the cost of your bond proposal?
$9 billion over 10 years.
Have you got a price tag yet? You said the other day that you had costed out your education package yet.
$14 billion over 10 years.
$14 billion over 10 years?
That's right. I was hoping you'd ask that, David.
No, wait a minute. Over 10 years?
That's right.
Well, that's only $1.4 billion a year. That's less than this Republican.
Pretty cheap, isn't it?
But I mean, you're...
Well, the 1.6 billion.
Is that a 5-year figure?
No, that's a 10-year figure as well.
Is that a 10-year figure?
Why is yours cheaper?
Well, I was joking. It really isn't. I mean, it's a major commitment. $14 billion over 10 years on the things that we're proposing here. This is over and above the other educational commitments we've made.
But the 1.4 as opposed to 1.6 is, where's the difference?
No, I think it is 1.6. Oh. Right. Somebody said it was 1.4, and I think that should be corrected to say 1.6.
And your estimate of $14 billion over 10 years includes the 100,000 teachers?
That's correct.
Were you at the Butler briefing yesterday?
Yes, I was.
Did he tell you all that get down to saying is complying with the agreement?
He did.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of the best briefings we've had to date on the whole matter of compliance with the agreement. He was very encouraging, and I would say to date pleased with the compliance and the cooperation he's getting. He did note that the challenges for compliance will probably increase as we begin to address the need to go to more sensitive areas, but nonetheless he was very upbeat about the degree to which we've been successful to date since the agreement in accomplishing everything the inspection teams had hoped to accomplish.
Do you talk at all about the diplomats that are supposed to be accompanying him, and if that's been...
He noted that the diplomats were no impediment at all, that in fact in some ways I don't want to, certainly I need to be careful here because it was a classified briefing, but I clearly detected from his comments that was not in any way a negative factor in carrying out their mission.
What's your understanding of when you're finally going to get to a vote on NATO?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, it depends on when we finally get to NATO. We're on it yesterday simply because there were reasons why Senator Lott apparently didn't want to start the Coverdale debate until this morning, but we won't get on to NATO seriously until after the Coverdale amendment is, or Coverdale bill is addressed, and that could take some time.
So you don't expect, there's no chance to bring up these appropriations this week?
I don't think so.
Do you think do you expect them up next week?
Well, I think it depends on, at this point I would say it's unlikely, but...
Does a lot of us say to you, we don't work this out, and this is pleasing us on the appropriations? Talk to you that way?
No, not today.
Appropriations only go up next week.
Well, I guess that's it. I need to consult with Senator Lott about, we might be able to run some of this on a dual track and begin the NATO debate and, well, triple track then. But
and Stevens yesterday, when he took up the UN money, he seemed to have a sense that he was trying to put together a streamlined IMF package.
Right.
So, in that way, avoid the sport. Just go with the IMF.
Exactly.
Now, I know you've been a Butler, so obviously you're feeling in debt to the UN this morning, but do you think that you guys...
What a cynical way to say it. Go ahead. David, we don't feel any debt to the UN just because we've gotten a briefing from Butler, but aside from that, proceed.
Do you feel that there may be some political wisdom at this stage to dealing with the IMF this way? In other words, go out with, a clean IMF bill, potentially, that could be tacked on something later and skirt the UN issue? Or do you feel so indebted to the UN that you feel
Well, I do feel indebted to I think our country should feel indebted to the UN. And I think that obviously a non-visit may be the reason why our troops aren't in the middle of serious military confrontation with Iraq right now. What's that worth to the United States? I think the UN plays a very critical role, and I think some of my ultra-right friends fail to recognize the extreme importance of UN missions and the degree to which the United Nations plays an important role in diplomacy throughout the world. So simply to commit to pay our dues isn't too much to ask for the services rendered not only to this country but to the world. Now, with regard to dividing it, I still believe that it's important for us to maintain an appropriations process that allows us to deal with these issues simultaneously. If you can expedite it in some way, I guess we'd look at it, but I'm pessimistic that this improves the chances for anything.
You're pessimistic that the streamlined bill improves the chances.
Right.
And on the conditions, Thomas, the conditions they attached yesterday were practically all business conditions, like bankruptcy. There wasn't a single mention of workers' rights or the environment in the entire meeting. Is there going to be any effort by you guys to put something on the floor, or do you feel that in your effort to keep out their conditions, you should
Patrick?
Well, I think there are some in our caucus who feel that conditions are warranted and that we have to use this opportunity to propose conditions. I guess my view is that we ought to look at the conditions, how reasonable they are, how able we are to incorporate them into the funding resolution without detrimentally affecting it ultimately. So I think I'm not adverse to any conditions. I think it's a matter of what they are and how hard they would be to implement. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take my lunchbox back. What's this say? It's got Elmer's glue, a compass. That's all $7.05.
Senator Daschle will join his colleagues on the Senate floor tomorrow to continue debate on NATO expansion. You can see live Senate coverage on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. Now First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton and Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. Today they announced plans for a museum dedicated to the achievements of American women. The museum will be located in Fair Park, Texas, and will open in October 2000. The half-hour briefing is hosted by the Foundation for Women's Resources.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Bonner. I am president of the Foundation for Women's Resources and would like to thank you for coming today to join in this very historic moment. Please help me welcome First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. Thank you. Thank you. Accompanied by Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. And Ed Whitaker of SBC Communications. Thank you. Thank you. Today, our dream becomes a reality. The Foundation for Women's Resources believes in the power of stories. We believe that the future is created and inspired by stories, and that American women need a place to tell those stories. Our dream is that in the 21st century, there will be a renowned place in America, and indeed in the world, where women and men will be inspired by women's contributions to our rich history, and will explore unlimited possibilities for the future through state-of-the-art technology. Today, we proudly announce that this wonderful, unique place will exist in the new millennium. The Women's Museum and Institute for the Future, America's first national museum dedicated solely to the achievements of women, will be filled with history and hope. That is what the Foundation for Women's Resources is all about. 25 years ago, we literally rewrote the history of women in Texas by creating an exhibit that toured the state and was seen by over 2 million people. Next, we started Leadership Texas, spawning similar programs in 7 other states and developing into Leadership America. Now, at the dawn of the new millennium, it's time to honor our past and shape our future. The Women's Museum and Institute for the Future will educate, enrich, and inspire visitors through the technology that will tell the stories of America's greatest women. Using virtual reality technology, visitors will engage in face-to-face conversations with famous women, both from the past and the present. In addition, guests will share the experiences of a pioneer woman as they cross America, join a women's suffrage march, stand in an assembly line of a World War II factory, or blast into space in their own personal moving theater. Please join me in welcoming the board of the Foundation for Women's Resources, and will you stand as I call your name? Pat Bailey, Cassandra Carr, and Patricia Diaz-Dennis, both with SBC Communications, Martha Farmer, Judge Judith Ford, Judge Judith Guthrie, Shirley Hoskins, Chula Reynolds, Ann Richards, Martha Smiley, and Ellen Temple. We are also honored to have a prestigious group of women serve as the National Advisory Panel for the museum, and the full list is in your program. Now it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you a man of great vision, a man whose company has been instrumental in making this museum a reality. It's my honor to introduce Ed Whitaker, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of SBC Communications. Ed?
Well, thank you very much. It's not necessary. Hi, Candace. How are you? Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy. Mrs. Clinton, we're pleased you could join us today. And Senator Hutchinson, it's good to see you again, as always. Members of Congress, representatives from the administration, ladies and gentlemen. When Kathy Bonner and Candace O'Keefe came to see me last fall to talk about a National Women's Museum project, it sounded like a good idea, and you don't know how persuasive they can be. They laid out their vision, and it became a better idea to me. It really was a good idea. It was more than a good idea. It was something that we just had to find a way to do. Here was a tremendous way to document the contributions that women have made across every facet of our society, from the arts to business to medicine to politics, and to use those contributions to inspire future generations. Well, to make a long story short, the Women's Museum was clearly a great idea that was way overdue. So then and there, we made a commitment to the Foundation for Women's Resources, and I'm very pleased to announce that commitment to you today. SBC Communications, the parent company of Southwestern Bell, Pacific Bell, Nevada Bell, and Cellular One, is proud to donate $10 million to the National Women's Museum. Thank you, Governor. And we challenge other corporations across the country to help us join with us in making this vision a reality. I know, and a lot of us know firsthand, what a big contribution women have made to our company and our industry. For us, this gift is a way to honor their achievements and the achievements of women everywhere, and to celebrate the bright future they have made possible for a whole new generation. At SBC, we're in the business of using technology to help people connect with one another. One of the reasons we're drawn to this museum is it will do the same thing. It will use advanced technology to create exhibits and learning programs that will make the past and the future come alive for visitors, to help people and ideas connect across generations, across cultures, and across centuries. You'll notice that one of the banners up here today says, "We don't know who we are until we see what we can do." I believe it's just as important to see where we've been and how far we've come. The Women's Museum will help millions understand just how far women in our society and other societies have come and how much they've accomplished along the way. And SBC is very pleased to be a part of it. Thank you. Kathy?
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. When we visited Ed, he had no idea that he would be making history with his decision, but that's exactly what he has done. This foundation gift is the largest corporate gift ever given to any women's foundation, project, or program in the history of the United States. Thank you, Ed, for your commitment. Thank you, Ed, for your commitment to preserving America's past and to providing leadership to educate and inspire future generations. We are grateful to you and SBC Communications for helping pave the way for this outstanding partnership between the private and public sectors. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson also has been instrumental in supporting our hopes for a national museum. Senator Hutchinson first said when we came to her with this project, we need to make this a project, a program for the country, a national millennium program. And she said, how do we do this? And we said, none of us were around for the last millennium. We don't have any idea. But she thought up a way. And she passed a resolution in the Senate designating the Women's Museum as an official millennium project of the United States. I am proud to introduce my Senator, Kay Bailey Hutchinson.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Clinton, I want to thank you for adopting this project that is so dear to all of our hearts. We appreciate it very much. Ed Whitaker, you made this happen, and we will never forget it. Kathy Bonner, without her behind everything that has happened so far, we all know this would not be a reality. Governor Richards. The French author Alexis de Tocqueville once said, if I were asked to what the singular prosperity and growing strength of that people ought mainly to be attributed, I should reply to the superiority of their women. Of course, he was talking about America. Women did build our nation side by side with men. Their story is often unheralded, but their sacrifices, victories, and trials must be told. Pioneer women laid the foundation upon which we build. They blazed the trails. They pried open the doors. Their story is as old as America's itself, and it needs to be told, and told right. That is why I am so thrilled about this Women's Museum. It's been 500 years since Columbus discovered America, over 200 years since our revolution. We're getting ready to enter a new millennium, and I think it's about time we had a museum dedicated to the women of our country. This museum will teach and inspire our nation's young women and girls. It will make the pages of their history books come alive. Our thanks go to Ed Whitaker and Southwestern Bell today. We thank them for their generous grant and for their vision of a better future. Your contribution helps ensure that the museum will evolve from a dream into a reality. There is another story that will be told. It is that there is nowhere in the world where there is a better place to be a woman than the United States of America. Women across the globe will hear our story, and hearing it, they will gain hope and strength. Our lives are made possible by the blood, sweat, and tears of women who went before. We will remember their legacy and be inspired to climb to even greater heights. Thank you very much.
When this museum premieres in the year 2000, it will be an international tourist destination, not only because the building is architecturally significant, but because its debut will take place during the country's 21st Century Fair to be held at Fair Park in Dallas. Our design architect is Wendy Evans Joseph from New York. We selected Wendy because of her work at Pay, Cobb, Freed & Partners as the Senior Design Architect for the United States Holocaust Museum. Wendy, where are you? Wendy? Wendy is renovating and preserving a structure that is on the nation's most endangered list of historic buildings and designing inside a technologically wonderland for families to visit. Gail Ringel will lead the exhibit team from Joseph A. Wetzel Associates of Boston. Where's Gail and Joe? Thank you. Using visionary creations, we will engage visitors, both women and men, as they learn about great American women and their contributions and achievements in society. We will design innovative exhibit spaces that will be unlike anything that exists anywhere in the world. Now I want to take you on a trip through our dream. I would like to invite you to a virtual reality tour of the Women's Museum.
Welcome to the Women's Museum, an institute for the future, the most comprehensive state-of-the-art facility dedicated to showcasing the contributions of women in society. Our tour starts at the front of the Women's Museum, looking directly at an extraordinary Art Deco statue of a woman rising from a cactus. As the doors swing open and your eyes begin to adjust, you're struck by the stark contrast of the traditional exterior of the building to its dramatic modern interior, featuring wide open spaces covered with an elegant lattice of steel trusses. It's hard to imagine 90 years ago, this historic structure housed livestock shows during the day and featured opera performances at night. The orientation area opens into the gathering space, the focal point of the museum. The gathering space is a place of orientation and unity. To your right, this diagonal wall is a line that crosses over the entire three-story building. It symbolically recalls the dual nature of women's lives split between personal and public worlds. If you look up from where you stand, you can see the museum's 2 additional floors. The gathering's expansive space will feature temporary exhibits from all over the world. The space will also host future functions without disturbing the exhibits. As you climb the steps to the 2nd floor, you will find yourself in the theater mezzanine, peering over a room designed to promote discovery and wonder. For special programs or performances, the back wall of the theater can be raised, allowing the audience to spill into the gathering space. Visitors to the Women's Museum will watch regularly scheduled performances, films, and lectures. Looking from the balcony of the dual-level theater, you can see seating for almost 300 people. A quick jump up to the 3rd floor will land you in the midst of a permanent collection. To the right is the Woman's Walk of Fame. A trip down the walkway reveals a changing series of panels featuring images of famous women. Take a sharp left to finish your tour, and you'll find yourself heading into the Institute for the Future. Lined with computer terminals linked to the internet, the Institute offers hands-on training sessions and a fun learning environment. That concludes your preview tour of the museum's magnificent layout and construction. Now you must return when its walls and floors are covered with interactive exhibits, demonstrations, and learning sessions.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women, for the lives of women have been more affected by its new horizons than any other group.
The Women's Museum, a chronicle of the past, an institute for the future, where the modern world will be redefined every day. See you there in the new millennium.
When the Women's Museum opens, It will be 5 years after the International Conference on Women held in Beijing, where Hillary Rodham Clinton galvanized the hearts and minds of people around the globe. Mrs. Clinton not only moved the audience, she moved the world when she said, and I quote, "If we take bold steps to better the lives of women, we will be taking bold steps to better the lives of children and families." We are honored that you could be with us today, Mrs. Clinton, and we save an existing national treasure and create a new American treasure for the third millennium.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am honored to be here and be part of this very important announcement. I want to join everyone in commending Kathy Bonner for the extraordinary work she's done in bringing this about. I want to join also with everyone in thanking Senator Hutchison for her role in making sure that this museum was seen as it should be seen, a very historic opportunity to celebrate women's achievements and one that will be there at the beginning of the new millennium for all of us to enjoy. And I want to thank Ed Whitaker and SBC for seeing that vision that Kathy and others outlined and making such an extraordinary gift. There are so many different reasons why this is a significant event. Kathy has alluded to a few of them. First of all, choosing the site that has been chosen, Fair Park, is a statement in and of itself, because it is part of one of the most historic districts in our entire country, and it is on the endangered list. Some of you may know that the President has proposed that we do more to save America's treasures, that we, not only through public support, through the federal government, through the Park Service and other agencies, try to make sure we don't lose the heritage that was so important to us as a people, but that we also seek out private support as well. By choosing this site for this museum, you are achieving that. You are saving a historic building, and as both Ed and Kay were saying to me, one that holds a lot of memories for people not only in Texas, but people around the country. Ed said to me that he remembers the livestock shows that used to be there. Kay asked him if he'd ever went to the opera. He admitted he hadn't. But when it was pointed out that that facility was used during the day for livestock shows and at night for opera, Kay said, "That's Texas." So this is also Texas, to take that particular building, which meant so much in the activities that it housed for the people who lived there and visited, but also means so much to the nation because of its unusual architecture and history. Secondly, we do need, as we move toward this millennium, to think of ways that, as we say at the White House, we intend to honor the past and imagine the future. Or as those of you who are behind this museum have said, honor the past and shape the future. And what we've been doing at the White House through the Millennium Council that the President appointed is to think about the gifts we wish to give to the future. What is it we want to bring from the past? What is it we want to take this time in the present to create in order to pass on to future generations? Well, we first have to make clear what our history is as a people, and I would very strongly add, as women. I was in Houston on Monday, and I met with a group of women and men, and we were talking about a variety of things, and one woman said she had stayed up late the other night to look at the CNN program that's been running this month that I taped an introduction to, a Perspectives program about the history of American women. And she said, you know, I consider myself a very well-educated person and well-informed, but there was so much that I did not know about the history of American women. I had to confess that even though I had previewed the programs and had taped the presentation for the beginning of them, I learned a lot as well. So just think of what this museum will mean to the countless numbers of young people who go through, who, like all of us, will learn something about who came before us, the contributions they made, and what women have done in all aspects of life to make it possible for us to enjoy the blessings that we have now. Thirdly, this is an extraordinary public-private partnership, and it is one that really, I hope, stands as an example for the rest of the country. People coming together, pooling their resources thanks to an extraordinary lead gift, and building something that will be a gift to the future because the entire community is committed to it. I also am pleased that it will be part of the millennial celebration that I hope will take place in every community around our country. In addition to launching an effort to save America's treasures, which I hope some of you will be involved in and you'll hear more about later, we're also running lectures at the White House, the Millennial Lectures. We've had 2, they're on the internet. We've had an extraordinary response because we feel, as I've been out around the country talking with people, that there's a great interest, a renewed interest in making sure we do know who we are and where we came from and what we need to do to make the future as good as we possibly can. Americans have so much to be proud of, so many blessings to count, but I think it's especially important that we learn what we have in common. And the one way of doing that is to make sure we appreciate all the stories of the people who came before. I was thinking about this museum and thinking about the site, and I love the virtual reality tour, especially the woman coming out of the cactus, which I think somehow sums up a woman's life to me. So there will be lots of stories of lots of women who may have stepped on a few or had a few thrust at them, but came right out and kept going time and time again. Because this year we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the founding of the women's rights movement in Seneca Falls. One of its leaders, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, made the revolutionary statement at that time: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." She took a lot of grief for that. She was considered radical and shunned by a lot of polite society. But she said what needed to be said. And much of our nation's history since then has been a struggle to make that simple statement live in the life of every man and woman in our country, to make sure that every citizen is given the opportunity to participate fully in America's dream and vision. I hope that all of us know that the struggle is far from over, but today's announcement to establish the Women's Museum will help ensure that the struggle and the history of the struggle is told and continues. I can just see in my mind's eye all of the people who are going through that museum wondering at what they are learning. Some of them perhaps not believing what they are seeing because they've never been taught that before. I remember in 1993 when the Smithsonian decided, after much work, to expand its exhibition about First Ladies, beyond just showing the gowns. And the curator at that time, Edith Mayo, a historian of some renown, worked very hard to display what women in that position had done to advance so many causes in our country, whether it was Abigail Adams or Dolly Madison or Sarah Polk or any of the women over the last 200 years. But many of the visitors to the museum were upset and protested, saying that can't be true. We never learned about that. You can't tell me that Sarah Polk went out into the slums of Washington to try to bring attention to the conditions that people were living in. You can't tell me that Mrs. Taft went in and told President Roosevelt she expected him to choose her husband to succeed him. You can't tell me that it was Lou Hoover who invited the first African American to the White House. You have to be making this up. You're probably doing it, Edith Mayo told me, someone said, because Hillary Clinton wanted you to. Well, I hated not to be able to take the credit, but in fact, the credit belongs to history and all the women who came before. Their stories, their contributions, all should be heard, so that it is no longer a surprise when a woman is elected senator from Texas or a woman like my friend Ann Richards is elected governor of Texas. It's no longer a surprise when I stand with Lieutenant Colonel Collins in the White House, as I did a week ago, and introduce her as the first woman to head a NASA mission. That it isn't a surprise when a little girl says in a classroom somewhere that she wants to grow up to be the chief executive officer of SBC or the President of the United States, because there are so many women who have paved the way who, if we are honest and acknowledge their stories and their contributions, will expand our understanding of what America really means and what gifts we can take together into the next century. So thank you for making this museum a reality. That was wonderful. Well, you've done all the work. I'm just here as a cheerleader.
We look forward to showcasing the many, many accomplishments you've made, Mrs. Clinton, throughout the world in our Women's Museum. And when we saw the statue outside of this building of a woman rising from a cactus, we knew we had found the right home. We would like to present to you what we hope will be a symbol of both the museum and a symbol of the millennium, which is a woman rising from a cactus in a gold pen.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you.
And now, Ed, Senator, if you will join me on this side, and Mrs. Clinton, if you will come right here, I will ask you to please raise this curtain and unveil the Women's Museum and Institute for the Future.
Seen it before. Still looks good. Still looks good. Without the livestock. I think I said right there. I'm not sure.
That is so great.
Thank you very much for coming and being with us today. And there are refreshments in the back. And we look forward to seeing you all in October of the year 2000.
So great.
That's our target date, October.
Yes.
That's a great job.
We're in Fresno, California, located in the Central Valley of California in the Kearney Mansion, on the first floor in the estate office, where Kearney conducted his business of his 5,000-acre Fruitvale estate. He had crops of many kinds, but his most famous was his raisins. And this is being in the heart of Fresno, you are within a 60-mile radius of 90% of the raisins that are grown in this country. So Theo Kearney became known well as the Raisin Baron, or the Prince of Fresno, or some of the other terms, because of his determined efforts to create a raisin bargaining association, which still exists today. He established the colony system, which was unique to this area, and he sold land in 20-acre parcels so that a family could come out and grow 1, 2, or 3 crops a year as hard as they wanted to work, which was impossible in other parts of the United States at that time. This particular area of the world probably grows better raisins than any other place else in the world. And because of that, much of the acreage here is growing raisins, or growing grapes that later become raisins. They are put down in between the rows and dried there in about a 3-week period in late August and early September. And because of this unique situation that we have here with a very dry season during the drying time, it's a very profitable way to use your grapes in this valley. Kearney was concerned about the lack of organization, and therefore he set about organizing the farmers in this area in the late 1890s to try to get some kind of control over the quality and the marketing and the prices. And it was a very difficult situation because, as we know, farmers are very independent people, and it almost broke his heart in the process, and it went through great struggle. He went through great struggle to accomplish this, but he did organize them, and it has set a precedent for the raisin industry that we have today. You really enter the Kearney property about 7 miles back on Fresno. His drive was 11 miles long. It had palm trees, eucalyptus, and oleanders on either side. And then you enter the park, which was designed by Rudolf Ulrich, a rather famous architect at that time, a protege of Frederick Law Olmsted. The mansion is a National Historic Structure, as is the park, a National Register park. It is a very pure house in the sense that when we replace something, we replicate it to the original. So most of the furnishings in the house are from the original. The wall coverings are replicated or original, as are the floor coverings. The Fresno Historical Society, though it does a lot of other things such as preservation, and we're now working on building a large museum in downtown Fresno, administers Kearney Mansion Museum as a historic site, and it's open to the public Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays, and holidays throughout the year.
On April 3rd. Mac McLarty, Counselor to the President and Special Envoy to the Americas, on April 9th. Marvin Runyon, Postmaster General, on April 14th. Charles Rosati, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will appear, of course, on Tax Day, April 15th. Zoe Caldwell, actor and winner of the 1998 Sir John Gielgud Award, will speak on April 17th. Transcripts and audio files of National Press Club luncheons will be posted this afternoon at our website, npc.press.org. To purchase audio and videotapes, call 1-888-343-1940. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table and pass them up to me. I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests have been introduced. From your right, Jeffrey Dvorkin, Vice President for News, National Public Radio. Russell Mokaber, Corporate Crime Reporter. Andy Glass, Cox Newspapers. Bob Murray, Publisher, Congressional Quarterly. Godfrey Sperling, Christian Science Monitor. Marcus Raskin, co-founder of the Institute for Policy Studies. Fred Kaplan, professor, City University of New York, and a biographer of our guest today. Ken Esky, chairman of the Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for just a moment. Gil Klein, media general and former president of the National Press Club, who arranged today's lunch. And the remainder of our head table will be introduced in just a minute. But first, we have some good news to share. It is said that every reporter has the first chapter of the great American novel buried in his bottom desk drawer, just waiting for the time and inspiration to turn it into a best-selling, fame-attracting, money-making prose. To test that theory, the National Press Club holds an annual fiction writing contest for our members. This year, the contest was judged by two literary agents, Nina Graybill and Jenny Bent. And here are the results. Honorable mention goes to freelance writer Elizabeth Shevchuk Armstrong for a chapter from her historical novel, Hotspur. Elizabeth, would you come up, please? Second honorable mention goes to Ron Geigley of Geigley and Associates for his story, The Woods. Ron? Now the ribbons. The third prize goes to Stephanie Fall for a chapter of her novel entitled Tag City. Stephanie has now won first, second, and third prize in the 5 years of this contest, yet inexplicably, she's still working for the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. Second prize goes to Grant Dillman. Grant, who was UPI bureau chief, literally had this novel entitled Impatient Mistress in his bottom drawer for decades. He started writing it during the Johnson administration. When he concluded, someone would have to be crazy to want to be president. It's the story of a president who suffers from schizophrenia, and the wire service reporter, I wonder who that is, who finds out about it despite the White House's best efforts to conceal it. Grant? And first prize goes to Keith Epstein, Washington correspondent for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, for his story entitled Homecoming. This story grew out of Epstein's coverage of pilots returning from the Gulf War, especially when a 4-year-old girl rushed out to greet her daddy. It deals with the psychological effects of being away from home for a year and of the mental impact of the smart bombs on the pilots who fired them. Well, congratulations to you all. And now to our speaker. Today we are pleased to have with us Mr. Gore Vidal, a man who has been described, not by himself, but by the Boston Globe, as our greatest living man of letters. Back when Mr. Vidal was beginning his trade, he shocked the public by writing about sex and scandal in Washington. Now, of course, any two-bit White House correspondent can get more salacious stuff than he was writing about back that used to upset the blue bloods back in the 50s. So what is Vidal writing about now? The Smithsonian Institution. That's the title of his latest book. But I have to tell you, this is not your father's Smithsonian Institution. Somehow this is a 13-year-old who's involved in time travel, who goes to the basement of the Smithsonian Institution, gets involved in time travel to develop the atomic bomb in the 30s. This is eventually Mrs. Grover Cleveland. Let me tell you, this is one weird book. And a lot of fun to read, but I hope he'll explain more about it to us today. The last time Mr. Vidal spoke here in 1994, he had already been at our podium about a dozen times. And his father, an aviation pioneer, as well as his grandfather, Senator Thomas Pryor Gore of Oklahoma, spoke here as well. One can imagine in the Vidal homestead in Ravello, Italy, shelf upon shelf of National Press Club mugs dating back to the early part of the 20th century. So it is only fitting that he speak to us just days before our 90th anniversary. Young Gore Vidal grew up in Washington, immersed in its politics as he read the congressional record to his blind grandfather, Senator Gore. His first historical novel was entitled Washington, D.C., and it delved into the underside of Washington politics of the 1950s. It served as the foundation for a series of novels that chronicle American history, including Burr, Lincoln, 1876, Empire, and Hollywood. They search, sometimes in vain, for the nation's great promise. Few contemporary writers have generated as much controversy as Gore Vidal. in his 23 novels, 2 plays, and many, many essays, not to mention countless television appearances. Mr. Vidal has dissected every aspect of American history, politics, and life, and he is here to do it again for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome for Mr. Gore Vidal.
Thank you. I first spoke here in 1961, and I have mixed feelings about the press, as everybody does, but you are the most wonderful audience because you eat lunch faster than any group that I've ever talked to. I mean, it is such a joy. It's just over like that. And we can get down to the really serious stuff about Monica and Kathleen's correspondence, to really important subjects. But before we get to that, I planned just a little foreplay here about the origins of the American empire and the meaning of the Cold War, how it started, who started it, who benefited. Because here we are at the 20th century, and the second Christian millennium are heading hand in hand for the exit. Personally, I thought they'd never go without taking us with them. We've still got about 700 more days, so fingers are crossed. We all know that centuries and millennia are just arbitrary markings, a bit like the bookkeeping at Paramount Pictures. I see some of you have made movie sales. But symbolically, they mean a lot to those who are interested in why we are today what we are and doing what we are doing. This goes particularly for the one indisposable, or did the president say indispensable, nation on earth, and the last self-styled global empire loaded down with nukes, bases, and debts. I should note here that I have now lived through nearly 3/4 of this century. I enlisted in the Army of the United States at 17, went to the Pacific, did nothing useful. I was just there, as Richard M. Nixon used to say, when the bombs were falling. Actually, the bombs are not really falling on either one of us. I was writing a novel, and he was making a fortune playing poker. Now, suddenly, it's 1998. I never thought I'd see that happen. And last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Also, more ominously, last July 26 was the 50th anniversary of the National Security Act that, without any national debate or the people's consent, replaced the old American Republic with a national security state very much in the global empire business, which explains, but first let us get into the time machine. It is the Ides of August, 1945. Germany and Japan have surrendered, and some 13 million Americans are headed home to enjoy, well, the bottom line was always being alive. Home turned out to be a sort of fairground where fireworks go off and the band plays Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, and an endlessly enticing funhouse flings open its doors and we file through. We enjoy halls of mirrors where everyone is comically distorted, ride through all the various tunnels of love, and take scary tours of horror chambers where skeletons and cobwebs and bats brush past us. And suitably chilled and thrilled, we're ready for the exit in everyday life. But, to the consternation of some and the apparent indifference of the rest, we were never really allowed to leave the funhouse. It has become a permanent part of our world, as were those goblins sitting under the apple tree. Officially, the United States was at peace. Much of Europe and most of Japan were in ruins, often literally, certainly economically. We alone had all our cities and a sort of booming economy, sort of, because it depended on war production. And there was, as far as anyone can tell, no war in the offing. Briefly, the arts flourished. It looked like it was going to be a golden age. Glass Menagerie was staged. Copland's Appalachian Spring was played. A film called The Lost Weekend, not a bad title for what we'd gone through, won an Academy Award, and the as yet unexiled Richard Wright published a much admired work, Black Boy. While Edmund Wilson's Memoirs of Hecate County was banned for obscenity in parts of the country, though it would be allowed out today in Washington, D.C. Quaintly, each city had at least 3 or 4 daily newspapers, while New York, as befitted the world's capital, had 17 newspapers. But a novelty, television, had begun to appear in household after household, its cold, gray, distorting eye relentlessly projecting a fun house view of the world. Those who followed the ugly new minted word media began to note that often while watching television, we kept fading in and out of a chamber of horrors. Our ally in the recent war, Uncle Joe Stalin, as the accidental President Harry S. Truman called him, was growing horns and fangs that dripped blood. On Earth, we were the only great unruined power with atomic weapons, yet we were somehow at terrible risk. Why? How? The trouble appeared to be over Germany, which on February 11th, 1945, had been split at the Yalta Summit meeting into 4 zones: American, Soviet, British, and French. As the Russians had done the most fighting and suffered the greatest losses, it was agreed that they should have an early crack at reparations from Germany to the extent of $20 billion. At a later meeting at Potsdam, the new President Truman, with Stalin and Churchill, reconfirmed Yalta and opted for the unification of Germany under the 4 victorious powers. But something had happened between the euphoria of Yalta and the edginess of Potsdam. As the meeting progressed, the atom bomb was tried out successfully in a New Mexico desert. We were now able to incinerate Japan, or the Soviet for that matter, and we no longer needed Russian help to defeat Japan. We started to renege on our agreements with Stalin, particularly reparations from Germany. We also quietly shelved the notion, agreed upon at Yalta, of a united Germany under 4-power control. Our aim now was to unite the 3 western zones of Germany and integrate them into our Western Europe, restoring in the process Germany's economy, hence fewer reparations. Then, as of May 1946, we began to rearm Germany. Stalin went up the wall at this betrayal. The Cold War was on. At home, the media was beginning to prepare the attentive few for disappointment. Suddenly, we were faced with the highest personal income taxes in American history to pay for more and more weapons, among them the world killer hydrogen bomb. Why? Because the Russians were coming. No one knew quite why they were coming or with what. Weren't they still burying 20 million dead? Official explanations for all this made very little sense. But then, as Truman's Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, merrily observed, in the State Department, we used to discuss how much time that mythical average American citizen put in each day listening, reading, and arguing about the world outside his country. It seemed to us that 10 minutes a day would be a high average. So why bore the people? Secret bipartisan government is best for what, after all, is or should be a society of docile workers, enthusiastic consumers, obedient soldiers who will believe just about anything for at least 10 minutes.
A good book, Partners in Power. I would like to suggest that to you. Go to your library.
Who's the author?
Roger Morris.
Okay.
It does some very good research on his governance of Arkansas, the things that went on, what happened, how things were dealt with. I think it's very important for people to be informed on these things and to truly think about it, digest it, consider it, and apply it to what is happening today.
Thanks. We'll go ahead and take our last call, then we'll let you both respond. Southgate, Michigan, our last call. Good morning.
Yes, I'll make it quick. I know the show's almost over.
Thanks.
I would like both people to know, and I'd like people just to know in general, that I actually believe the president. And what mostly concerns me is that I trust him to do what's right for this country, because I know he made mistakes in the beginning, and I had some problems with those, but in the last 4 years or so, he has done what's right for this country, and he's helped my family, and he's helped a lot of other families, and I think it has been a whole convergence of people that just hate him so much, and that disturbs me.
Audrey Mullen.
Well, again, it's not a question of hating somebody and being out to get them. You can hate somebody all you want, but that does not spark investigations. Illegal activities and patterns of illegal activities spark investigations. And it's been one thing after another with Bill Clinton. And I think that where there is smoke, there is fire. And a number of his colleagues and former business associates have been indicted and sent to jail. I think that many of his activities really warrant looking into. And you can say what you want. Well, you can say what you will and have the last word. But really, it's like the old story of the two women watching the army march by, and one woman says to the other, gee, it's a shame how they're all out of step except my Johnny.
Lisa Caputo.
Okay. You know, I thank the caller for her views. I think that, as I've said from the get-go on the show, that we have to wait until all the facts come out, that the president has denied all the allegations, and I believe the president, and I'm going to let the facts come out as they will. I think that you raise a very important point, which is that it's a notion of the privacy issues. What is going on right now in Washington is an investigation, Audrey would claim, into obstruction of justice. These are investigations into allegations of sex. I personally, Lisa Caputo speaking for herself, have to question what in the world that has to do with governing the country.
Tomorrow, Washington Journal welcomes Tom Ferraro of Bloomberg News and Dr. James Dobson, founder and president of Focus on the Family. Join us with your comments and questions tomorrow morning at 7 Eastern here on C-SPAN. And this weekend on America and the Courts, Scripps College in California awards its highest honor to Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. America and the Courts this Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. Next, author Gore Vidal. This afternoon at the National Press Club, he talked about the U.S. role in the world, the National Security Act, and the Constitution. Following his remarks, he took questions from the Press Club audience. The event's about an hour.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. This is our 90th anniversary year. My name is Doug Harbrecht. I'm president of the National Press Club and Washington News editor of Business Week magazine, a McGraw-Hill Companies publication. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. Tomorrow, Secretary of Agriculture Dan Glickman will speak about food safety. And our last speaker in March will be James Wolfenson, President of the World Bank, speaking on March 25th. In April, we'll hear Michel Comdessous, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, on April 2nd. Stephen Goldstone, Chair and CEO of JR Nabisco,